Okay, well, thank you for everybody that's joining us. We've got an exciting discussion planned for today. We've got a wonderful panel joining. If a little housekeeping items as we get started. If you guys have any questions for the panelists or for comments about the discussion that's happening, you can hit the Q&A button and be able to submit that. Our team will gather those as we're going, and we'll try to get those answered from the panel by the time we end today. Today we've got Cyberhill COO Jake McAndrew, who's going to be moderating, and I'll turn the time over to him.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Welcome to everybody who's hidden to my view and I can't see. We really appreciate you guys joining. Got a really interesting discussion today, kind of around AI and governance. For the folks on this call, I know it's a very important topic that we experience day to day. I'm hopeful that those on the call um, have some thoughts and experience as well. Um, this conversation that we're about to have is one that's happening in every enterprise, whether you know it or not, right? How do you govern AI that's already running, right? Um, it's moving fast. In many cases, it's operating outside of what's visible to the people that are responsible for it, right? Compliance teams, CISOs, architects are supposed to be, in the know on how things are deployed. They're often last to find out due to issues. Um, hopefully today, I mean, our plan here is to get tactical about that, not discuss frameworks or aspirations, but what does governance actually look like when doing it at scale, in production, with under real constraints, right? Um, I am joined by a great panel today. Everyone here that is going to be speaking for you is dealing with the exact issues I just mentioned. To quickly do some intros, first we'll start. I'll just go in order as I see it. So Patrick McGarry is the Federal Chief Data Officer at ServiceNow, one of the largest software platforms in the world right now, attacking this governance problem head on. We have Andrew Buffone. He's the Director of Advanced Analytics at M&P Digital, which is one of Canada's leading professional services and IT firms. And we have Mark Murtagh, who is the Global VP of Solution Architects at CrowdStrike, and is going to bring a unique lens, obviously from the cybersecurity side, when we talk about AI and governance. So I'm going to jump right in. First topic, Patrick, I'm going to go to you. You and I historically have spent a lot of time talking about this, but I wanted to get into what you believe minimum viable governance, for lack of a better term, really looks like, right? You sit currently at a good intersection between federal compliance and enterprise platform delivery at ServiceNow. Um, you know, the governance process today, as people see it, whether it's real or not, seems to be cumbersome. It can be long. Sometimes it never finishes. When attacking, an AI capability development cycle or rollout of a tool, what do you believe kind of this minimum viable governance solution needs to be? What is the floor that we should be using?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing for governance is that a lot of people think of it as sort of a gate that you pass through before deploying whatever solution you have or whatever. But for me, you really have to think of it more like it's the operating system that your platform runs on, right? Whether it's AI or automation or even just decision intelligence that you're getting to. And when you see this stuff in practice, in progress today, the stall pattern that I'm seeing is not organizational, or excuse me, it's not technical, it's organizational. Teams sort of conflate responsible with exhaustive and build these 80-page policy frameworks before they try to ship anything, when really the question is, what's sort of the minimum set of controls that makes a failure survivable and explainable? Everything else you can iterate over. I think that's the biggest thing. The question that I would pose to people is not whether you're, AI ready. Everybody's got an AI readiness examination or test or, quiz that they're going to go through. The question is more whether your organization is ready to be responsible for the outputs of whatever you're doing with AI or data or what have you. So, like that's kind of the lens that I'm looking forward too is people understanding governance doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be embedded with what you're doing.
Yeah, maybe a follow-up for Andrew. I think you guys have a unique approach just from the client base that you have, right? Like, from Patrick's vantage point, sometimes there's some significant, scaffolding and infrastructure inside of kind of federal organizations or these large regulated organizations. From your client base, what does this minimum viable governance kind of floor, does it look the same? Does it look different? How do you guys approach it when you're talking with your customers?
Yeah, so we've taken a very user-based approach to how we do the governance. It's more geared towards the adoption that you're trying to achieve. So one of our practices that we approach really is almost like a zone model, where we have kind of how you want to approach enabling AI and the minimum governance you need for what we'd call a knowledge worker, which is more of that personal productivity type AI tools. Then that's contrasted with a citizen developer and analyst that might be looking at more business AI that's going to dive into specific data sets or information within your organization. And then lastly, we have kind of a zone 3, which is professional development. And that's really when you get into more of your strict control IT-led AI initiatives. So by kind of identifying those user personas and what your outcomes you're trying to achieve, you can have minimum viable governance that fits that knowledge worker use case, which may restrict to some extent what they have access to, but it enables them to play with AI. And as you start to move up those zones, you start to apply those more guardrails, the more processes to ensure that you've identified where you need human in the loop versus autonomous agents can be used, where you need to have the approvals of the data domains and boundaries. And through each of those zones, what is that promotion path for those experiments? So one of the limiting factors we see in governance is if you don't see how you can actually implement this in your day-to-day life, then you work off to the side and you ignore the governance. So at each of those zones, it may have a different path to promotion. And based on where you fall in those zones, you'll have different accessibility to tools, different accessibility to data, and different guardrails to go through.
Awesome. No, I think, yeah, a lot of it is, just starting, right? I think sometimes we overthink the process, and it stifles innovation a bit, right? You have to be able to play and test. So I think the approach that you just described is a really, really good one. Andrew, I want to stay with you a little bit, right? Governance really only matters if you can afford to deploy the solution that you're either building or buying, right? So I want to flip the conversation a little bit to more of the economics, budget, return on investment, right? I think both, from Cyberhill's perspective, from MNP's perspective, going in and trying to establish kind of the return on investment for the tools that you guys are building or selling. Enterprise AI spend across the board, across industries is surging, right? But what we've seen is seat licenses are actually shrinking, right? So the spend and the budgets have gone way up, but fewer and fewer people potentially are using the high value systems that some of the organizations are purchasing, right? They might be using their own tools, right? When you guys are in those early phases with customers about a purchase, how do you help them evaluate if the juice is worth the squeeze, for lack of a better term, right? How, by both financially from a risk perspective, right? When you're approaching kind of this AI rollout problem, how do you guys think about that return and getting more and more users, I think from a governance perspective, access to the tools, right? That's kind of the approach hopefully you can take.
Yeah, and what we're finding in our marketplace really is there's a confusion between operational AI versus productivity AI. And that's usually the first starting point in understanding with executives what they're trying to achieve. Productivity AI creates efficiencies, but it doesn't necessarily generate revenue or cost savings. Whereas operational AI will drive those revenue, will increase your cost savings potential. And so really understanding what are you trying to achieve and where are you trying to tie that value to If you're looking at productivity AI and are assuming that the FTE reduction is going to justify the cost, those are usually a recipe for failure. Now, if you're looking at it as productivity AI to reduce the need to increase your FTE, making your existing headcount productive to reduce that future FTE purchase is where you want to focus your use cases towards. Now, if you're looking at the operational AI, then it's a different value proposition. And whether you're going productivity AI versus operational AI, those will have different compliance risk exposure. So typically your operational AI, you do have a better ROI on those AI initiatives because it's operationally focused and they're more well-defined use cases. When you start to get into productive AI, you're now asking your workers to access a vast amount of information across a wider range of use cases. So your compliance risk and your data exposure increases. So typically we would try to drive towards more adoption of operational AI. That ROI you get on those operational AI use cases allows you to fund and perpetuate the investments that can lead towards your productive AI.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you touched on risk a little bit, and I want to pivot to risk in ROI here. So Anant, welcome. As a quick intro for Anant, Anant is the IT enterprise architect at Itron, and Itron's a global technology company that provides smart infrastructure solutions, software services for energy, water, smart city management. Anant, it's great to have you. I think from your seat, risk looks a little bit different, right? Itron manages infrastructure with real financial consequences. How do you and your team frame that risk-adjusted ROI case for purchasing AI and implementing AI internal to Itron?
Yeah. Yeah, and so first, thanks for having me here, guys. It's a really interesting dimension, right? I mean, we do play a slightly unique role, both in our industry and also on this panel, right? You called it from a security standpoint, we are held to a certain standard, which is a lot higher than most other companies, regulated or unregulated. And the way we have to look at this in three dimensions. One is customer data, the other one is historical processing, the third one is our IP competitive data, right? Our controls over there. AI for us is extremely important in terms of being able to define how we're actually measuring ROI. It really comes back to defining what are the outcomes, right, that we're targeting for every single investment, and what is the level of accuracy we're getting out of these AI investments. We've all dealt with the problems of hallucination, and we can still make jokes about that every day. That's one example, but I'll give you another example that just recently this week, internally we turned down an AI request simply on the premise that it wasn't completely thought through. Right? They're coming through. A lot of these requests come through both from customers and our internal folks in the guise of strategy or strategic investments, which are entirely just POCs trying to tinker with tools, right? The focus really does depend on what is it that we're getting after in terms of falsifiable hypotheses, right? Stepping into these arrangements. Without that, we have nothing because we don't have a break glass situation where it says, stop this now because it's not proven out to be what we intended for it to be. And that's not just the ROI, there's also a risk factor there. And when you start intertwining the governance and the maturity of selecting investments based on a match to what our people need to be thinking about in terms of long-term projections and forecasts for the business versus just tinkering with the latest tool. I think that's where the rubber meets the road, as you would say, right? And that's how we're thinking about ROI and risk management in the broader spectrum here.
Awesome. Yeah, I think there's kind of maybe double clicking a little bit on risk and pivoting over, Mark, on more of the cybersecurity side, right? I think Anant at Itron, it sounds like the risk framework that you guys have established really does control how quickly or at all what gets started from an AI pilot perspective, right? And what the gates are to enable those things to actually get into production or start to onboard real users. A lot of enterprises aren't that lucky, I would say, and don't have that either have moved really fast and tried to push the envelope a little bit on innovation, and then have found themselves in this kind of AI sprawl, right? Tons of tools, not a whole lot of governance, don't even really know what's being used and how it's being used. Um, I think for you, Mark, the from a security perspective, the main thing I wanted to get at was the concept of, you know, decentralized versus centralized. You can talk about it as um, control, maybe. So from CrowdStrike's perspective, right? You guys have visibility into thousands of enterprises and environments. Hundreds and thousands of endpoints in each one of these environments. And because a lot of that AI capability is hidden, right, or isn't fully governed, right, and it hasn't gone through this really robust risk and governance process to get approved and is used, um, you know, how does CrowdStrike communicate, whether that's through tooling and actual implementation or just with your customers when you're speaking, what that shadow AI footprint looks like, right? How can we actually see what that tool sprawl looks like? And really, what's the security risk to that? Like, is there a way to corral it? Have things gotten too far out of control? Maybe just from your perspective, kind of how you guys talk with customers about the potential risk of this tool sprawl problem.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. And again, great to be here. Everyone, thanks for the opportunity and thanks for being with us, those that are on the line. We see a little bit of everything, Jake. I mean, it's been an accelerating industry for some time, but we're still, like we talk about it, still like we're in the early innings of a baseball match, where we're seeing a little bit of everything. Enterprises moving quickly but thoughtfully, making investments, but still getting stuck because you can't sort of prove the governance model, the integrity of the system, the safeguarding, ethical use, and so on. All the way to enterprises that have no idea, just the sprawl, because everybody's moving really fast. Boards are putting pressure on CIOs and lines of business to kind of not miss the AI arms race. And like, how does the business maximize the opportunity? How do you do more with less? How do you do more with agents? And how do you stay competitive with those that you're in market trying to outpace? But individual employees are equally like knowledge workers are leaning in, others are being pushed to by chain of command to do more. And so everybody's sort of accelerating. And then you're seeing the explosion in kind of employee-driven tooling as well to aid the knowledge worker to build and develop on behalf of folks that don't have software skills and so on. So there's this sort of acceleration and proliferation of AI adoption, top down and then bottoms up. And we kind of look at it a little bit where there's complexity and nuance, and you need to thoughtfully, partner with folks here on the call, thinking about like what is a true kind of AI policy and governance strategy look like as an expansion of like how you run your business traditionally. That can get pretty nuanced, and so on. But to simplify a little bit, like we look at it almost like see it, control it, protect it, govern it. And so kind of working backwards, right? You can't govern what you can't protect architecturally, and you can't protect what you can't control, and then you can't control what you can't see. To your call out earlier, Jake, about kind of shadow AI. So we spend a lot of time with customers that they've made thoughtful investments. They think they have, X or Y number of those investments, and then they've sponsored and approved, to Anant's point, like, line of business investments, agent development, and they'll tell us, okay, we've got X, Y, and Z, and Z might be we've got 50 agents deployed and they're handling certain business functions. And then you take a closer look at the architecture and the environment, and they've actually got 500 agents running, and there's most of them are unsanctioned, and there's MCP servers being deployed, and then folks have used like new AI kind of tooling and API kind of advancements in SaaS platforms. And line of businesses have gone there themselves. And so you start to kind of just step them through the process a little bit of, get your arms around both the architecture that you've invested in internally, and have you wrap the necessary safeguards and technological controls around it? And then are you partnering with, organizations? ServiceNow is a great example. It's a big partner of ours, where you have the workflows kind of baked in, where we provide, the cyber intelligence around, hey, we're assuring the safety and, non-malicious sort of compromise of X investment. Well, how's that being monitored and governed? And if we're exposing risk, is that work, traversing an existing workflow that then has to getting an accountability to prove to regulators that you've taken the necessary action, or you've got the auditing controls in place, that you acted on the risk that we were surfacing. So there's a little bit of like simplifying to just step through the way that you kind of logically will like look at an asset, try and govern and control the asset, safeguard the asset from malicious intent, or from bad actor compromise, and then ensure the governance models are kind of wrapping around that. And the biggest thing that's probably changed for us with how we see customers approaching it is just in like how you prove compliance, with frameworks, or how you enforce governance. And it's moved a little bit from a, hey, we used to audit once a year. And this is very tactically kind of obvious when you look at the time to compromise now with vulnerabilities that are discovered. And I won't get into Mythos and GPT Cyber, like the two, the new apex predator in the cyber world, like threatening the enterprise. But they shone a spotlight on, we already were tracking like adversary speed to compromise on a recently disclosed vulnerability. Just a handful of years ago, it was probably about a year that it would take someone to kind of compromise, and we would see working exploits in the wild compromising a published vulnerability. Now it's ours. And with new alpha, apex predators, bad actors are weaponizing that proactively and discovering vulnerability and chaining exploit code and compromising before you even knew there was a vulnerability. So that sort of caused enterprises to have to shift to like continuous sort of inspection and assurance from a governance perspective. And so the technical controls change a little bit to support an evolution in the governance policy, that it's always on and it's continuous sort of monitoring and leveraging evolutions in your own governance framework to make sure that those outputs are sort of seen at board level. And it's an always on kind of governance model, essentially, powered by the likes of our technologies and our partners.
And Mark, I'm going to jump in. I love how you sort of framed out the sort of chain of like, you got to see it so that you control it. You got, so, all the way down. And I think that for me, that's the most interesting thing, is making sure that we are measuring and more importantly, incentivizing the right things, right? I think one agency CDO that I was talking with framed it very well when he said, we stopped asking how many employees were using AI and started asking which AI systems are sort of generating the actual auditable, measurable outcomes. And it kind of changed the entire portfolio strategy for them, right? Because when every employee has a Copilot license, governance has to be broad and shallow. But now orgs are actually realizing that they have to concentrate their spend on fewer, more powerful workflows and outcomes, right? And I think that changes the ROI calculus completely, right? So now a single agentic workflow that touches, financial reconciliation may generate more value and more risk than 10,000 chat licenses. So governance kind of has to price the risk the same way that finance might price capital, right?
Yeah, spot on.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you one other angle on this, and Mark, you started to go there somewhat, right? I see this part about centralizing and decentralizing controls as being partially a shared risk, and I'll look at it from my seat as someone who signs SOWs, right, with my vendors. It's a shared risk as we're thinking about automating and enforcing. It's also contractual, right? Being able to capture a lot of what's happening in the market, a lot of the creep that's happening is embedded AI capabilities coming into the solutions. And in some cases, they're accessing data, which may or may not be, high risk, but in some cases, they are accessing data and data planes, which are extremely high risk. So being able to get that maturity in the contractual process itself, being able to disclose and highlight rather than just point customers to trust portals which are kept updated. I think that's another part of how we build this out in a shared risk model. Otherwise, all the responsibility falls upon the consumer, and we're always going to be chasing our own tails at that point. So,
Yeah, uh, I think it's a great point. I think to pull the thread, Mark, on something you said, maybe pass over to Patrick, right? I think, and Anant, you actually just brought this up too, right? I think tool sprawl is a problem. Tool sprawl has always been a problem, and one of the biggest issues with sprawl in any department, right? Security tool sprawl, or now kind of AI sprawl, is a lot of people buy software licenses or tooling and don't use the full suite. So you might come at this and say, "Hey, I bought a license for something and I don't use 40, I might not even know I don't use 40% of the features that are available to that. And there's a bunch of baked in AI capability that's in there that is either going unused or becomes a vulnerability and a risk because it's there, it's unknown, right? So there's this big gap in kind of like what's currently being used, what we have and is not being used, and how we kind of manage that. I think, Patrick, from the ServiceNow perspective, you guys do so much, right, across the platform. You have a great ability to kind of bring a lot of disparate workflows, tooling from a AI control tower perspective in the way that you guys manage your agents, right? Like you have the ability to kind of consolidate things into a single pane of glass. Do you feel like it's a problem your customers are asking for, meaning, hey, we want to use ServiceNow to solve this sprawl problem? Or are you guys stumbling up, hey, I want to solve this business outcome and I stumble across all of these things that, Mark described. I've got all these things I didn't know I had, or are being used, and now we can consolidate them. But just the approach for you guys about how you kind of attack this sprawl problem.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is going to be the maturity and awareness of the customer. Some of them that are more mature are absolutely worried about this, right? Because you look at some of the recent surveys, and there's millions of them that fly across your desk every day, but like 3/4 of employees within organization are estimated to be using unsanctioned AI in some way. And part of the problem, which you mentioned, is less than a third of existing tools are having their AI capabilities sort of audited, right? So now we have AI that we've embedded and sort of Trojan horsed our way into the organization in these existing SaaS tools. Because most of them at this point have some sort of AI tooling that's added in there, but that's part of the problem. And I think, you mentioned the AI control tower, that's one of ServiceNow's take on this. But I think there's a lot of people that are starting to tackle this problem beyond ServiceNow's walls, which is just how do we sort of capture, because the goal isn't to stop decentralized innovation, right? It's just to make it legible. If I know what you're running, I can help you to run it safely, kind of thing. And so being able to look at the embedded AI in SaaS tools that don't show up in a traditional software audit is part of the problem. I think most people that haven't reached that sort of maturity level think about AI as a separate thing, right? And so when HR buys a recruiting tool that has an AI screening feature, legal buys a contract review platform, neither team files an IT ticket, neither team identifies this as an IT risk vector, et cetera, right? And so starting to look at the observability, and you saw the same sort of thing with like a Monte Carlo, for instance. When you look at data observability, you're going to have to take the same approach with AI observability, understanding what we have where, what it touches, and how we can turn that AI black box of the thing that was bolted onto the side of Salesforce and make it a glass box. Like we got to reach inside and understand like how, what data is it using, what well-defined terms from your organization is it consuming, what's its thought process. If you get really fancy, maybe what part of your overall enterprise ontology, my favorite $1 million word, is it using to answer questions, and then sort of how does that output get derived? Like, I think that's the thing that really has to happen. I think a lot of people are starting to flirt with the edges of this thing, but I think most people don't think about sort of the layers and the depth of the complexity of the AI visibility problem.
Yeah.
Yes. Just add, Jake, because it's something, Patrick, we're seeing daily. The insidious nature of shadow AI, in that you kind of wind the clock back a little bit to the sprawl of SaaS apps and the unquestionable benefits that they've brought to the enterprise. But every new one looked a little new in that it was unseen and unknown in the enterprise beforehand, and there were ways to kind of get control over whether people were accessing that and how. But with shadow AI, especially embedded in modern day public apps, it's already an approved tool. It shows up in IT systems as, hey, that the employee's connecting to something that's already approved and known and passed and governed. But you've got that blind spot of what it is that's kind of running within there, and whether something locally, either at the client level through a browser, or someone's built an agent and they're using Claude Code or they're OpenClaw or Hermes or whatever, is now interacting with something that was a traditionally approved, now sanctioned business app. That's been something that I think we've seen customers struggle with. And I think you mentioned it, Patrick, like just getting visibility to the actual use and proliferation of AI that's embedded in previously approved tools. And it relates a little bit to I think I saw a question that's come in around, just how do you get control of employees utilizing that AI, or public, big frontier models in particular. And there's a bunch we can get into on that.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think the to continue kind of down the security track, I want to talk about sovereignty. I think I want to start with Anant and then maybe pass to Andrew, because I think you guys have a unique lens here. When we talk about sovereignty in the AI space, we're really talking about what you own, right? What's yours, and the differences potentially between running, hosting things in controlled kind of on-prem or private cloud style environments versus using third-party tools that might hit, other SaaS style offerings. How how important is that sovereignty question to you, and not maybe to start at Itron with just the regulatory environment that you guys operate in? Is it something that's at the forefront of your decision-making process? Is it kind of the way you guys look at the architecture to begin with, or are you okay with some exposure to kind of third-party tooling that maybe isn't 100% yours? And that goes, I think, where I'd like to go with the question a little bit is on the data side. Like, how much trust, back to the risk piece there, how much trust do we have in, the data, potentially being exposed or living somewhere else versus being contained and controlled by the organization?
So I'm going to give you the consultant answer. It depends, right? So, but okay, jokes aside, it is a real problem. It is a real situation, and it goes beyond just AI in our world and in several folks' world, right? We all have DPF considerations, SECs, everything is real, and we've been dealing with it for many, many years. Now with AI, right, sovereignty is it mostly becomes a categorical error from a commercial standpoint, and it's really more about legal sovereignty, the gap, and not so much about GPU location per se. Okay. If I were to start decomposing this, okay, it's into the actual requirements, which really start circling around data residency, the key custody, the contractual data use restrictions, and the exit rights, right? I mean, all of these things start playing into it, right? Again, I'll say it's a shared responsibility in terms of how we think about it. Practically, there is no single company around the world that can say with a straight face that we've got it all figured out, unless they're living on an island, okay? And so, again, it's part of it is contractual, the other part of it is legal maturity. And as you're starting to think about addressing this, you can do this through mature DPAs or spend 2 to 3x premium in trying to stand this up yourself. Okay, so I mean, from addressing it standpoint, that's the world that we live in. That's the way I see it, right? I can give you an example as recently as this year without naming anybody, any particular companies, right? We've had to have some really hard discussions about how to treat sub-processor agreements where DPFs are not compliant, right? Okay, and so how do we treat that? How do we address that? How do we let our customers know? How do we let our internal employees know? Because the demand is real, okay, but the solution over here is risk balanced. So for sure, it is a really, really important thing for us to consider, and we consider it every single day to take care of our customers and our employees and our partners. But there's no black and white decision making around this, right? The more important piece, though, is really it revolves around IP and IP adjacent engineering data. That's where it becomes really, really crucial for us, right? And I'm going to go back to, I think, Patrick, you said it earlier. We were just trying to talk about ontologies and knowledge graphs and embeddings of data, where some of that, those are our crown jewels, as you would say, right? Now, those need to be treated very, very carefully, and though from sovereignty standpoint, right, those need to be controlled very tightly. Okay, but it's at the end of the day, yes, it's real to the balances between contract and maturity of looking at contracts, having shared responsibilities with our partners, namely hyperscalers, companies that are serving us, and then finally knowing what is super critical and having established processes to maintain multiple levels of controls around those crown jewels versus trying to protect everything. Right.
Yeah, and just provocatively, Jake, maybe
Yeah.
because we have this conversation every day with customers. Like private AI infrastructure essentially solves a data residency and sovereignty kind of challenge. It doesn't solve a cyber challenge and reduce the risk
100%.
surface. If it's a private AI cloud that has misconfigurations, it's not governed properly at the app layer, or there's agents and identities with excessive privileges, like you're not you're not more secure than a well structured kind of public cloud service. You're basically running a privately insecure AI
Totally.
stack.
I was
So
trying not to say
that's
that.
why we partner with you guys and our customers. And if you're following CrowdStrike at all, we have a strong developing partnership in Europe with Schwartz Digits, the Stack It kind of sovereign native AI cloud in Europe, to try and solve some of this where customers want sovereignty, but they want like the resiliency, the safeguards, the security kind of baked in natively. That's
People need to divorce the concept of sovereign AI and secure AI, right? Sovereignty is a data jurisdiction concept, and security posture is a completely separate thing.
Yeah. I think maybe Andrew, to you on the sovereignty side, right? Like from an international perspective, right? Not too far from us, but I know that you guys deal with a lot of residency related restrictions when doing implementation. Just want to get your thoughts on kind of the sovereignty angle here.
Yeah, and I'll echo some of the comments that the others are making, but it all kind of goes part and parcel with everything we've been talking so far about. Really, what do you want to do to enable your workforce? Are they looking at productivity gains versus operational agents? And those will have different bearings on what you want to implement through something that might be on a hyperscaler that can implement those guardrails that you need versus those functionalities that your governance model and your operating model will have more relaxed restrictions on. So it really does couple tightly into that governance framework and that minimum viable governance approach. And quite often when we look at sovereignty versus custom agents or custom MCP servers that people are deploying, there is a fit for each of those. But what it comes down to at that operating model complexity is, where do you want to ensure you have those guardrails where you can apply those controls? But then also, what's the cost implications? often when you start to do this fragmented AI landscape, that fragmentation cost is significant in addition to the sovereignty risk. And so they start to snowball on you. So there, I think I saw a comment around Copilot and Foundry and ChatGPT and Claude. And this is really where you may need to promote and support that shadow IT in a positive sense to allow them to identify where there's gaps or demand to get AI productivity or operational efficiencies, but then fold that into a potential product like, say, a Foundry or something that's going to contain and control your agents, your API endpoints. And by bringing that back into your ecosystem, that's where you can apply your networking, your conditional access policies, your whitelisting, your blacklisting, and really ensure that you have that sovereign control.
Yeah, and there's technical controls to Andrew's point that help kind of monitor and enforce corporate data usage policy. Because I saw that in the same question, Andrew, around like how do you safeguard the data that's being sent to those toolings. So whether it's agents running locally that employees have just downloaded and started using, or they're interacting with MCP servers in the public domain, or you're just posting data into to public frontier models. There's technology that's safeguarding the usage of that, and like basically they're converting the prompts, and so like doing prompt monitoring to make sure that you're not violating any data controls, or if you're interacting with internal AI infrastructure, ensuring that the employee asset hasn't been compromised and it's a malicious sort of actor that's then using prompt injection techniques to sort of like impact the model themselves and the outputs, and safeguarding both data in and data out. Like that industry exists now as an extension of within the cyber industry, and it's where we get pulled into a ton of conversations at the moment as customers are trying to race to catch up a little bit on. We don't just want to shut down everything. If you wind the clock back 20 years, social media was and sort of internet commerce that was evolving was blocked across a lot of enterprises, and companies found, look, we need to relax and open some of these things up. The same thing here, like shutting down all employee access to public models is probably going to be counterproductive to how you want your business to really adopt the benefits and the productivity and knowledge gains. So putting the controls in place that both monitor locally at the endpoint, your kind of choke points in the architecture, and then how you're interacting with public space AI, that exists, and it's sort of weaving it into the existing tech stack and governance policy. To Andrew's point.
Yeah.
We're also seeing like in the AWS and Azure space, they're embracing and incorporating some of these public models. So quite often there might be a little bit of a lag between the model maturity and the model evolutions. But even in my company alone, we're not locking down VS Code with GitHub integration, but we put guardrails that you have to use it inside of a virtual desktop. So it's isolated outside of your personal client related information that you might have on your device. We're not suppressing Claude code, but if you want to use Claude code, you have to go through Foundry to access it. So it's accessible through a governed, controlled platform rather than just being a sprawl where you go onto the web and download it yourself. So there's a lot of these components that typical IT would try to put restrictions on it, but it's more about identifying that demand that people are signaling for and then embracing it in a way that you can monitor, log, and control without stifling innovation.
Yeah, and I think it's important to make the distinction. This isn't a binary choice, right? Most enterprises need a tiered architecture because full sovereign AI is hugely expensive, and not just financially so, but operationally, it's incredibly demanding, right? I think organizations that are pursuing sort of the full on-prem sovereignty are going to find that they really long-term are going to lack the AI ops talent to run it well. So yeah, it's not public versus private, but which workloads are sensitive enough to warrant sort of the cost and complexity of that sovereignty, of that secure deployment or whatever it is you need.
Cool. All right. I think we've got time for one more topic here. And I wanted to at least touch on edge AI today a little bit. I know maybe focusing this question on Anant and Mark here to start. not for you guys, right? The nature of your business, the amount of physical assets that are deployed into the field from a sensor perspective, um, uh, you know, traditional edge devices, that you, low bandwidth, latency constraints sometimes, all kinds of potential um, hardships for governance, right? How do you guys look at governance differently for edge devices, the data, and the actual workloads that are being run there versus, how we govern standard corporate IT data once it gets back home? Do you guys run different playbooks? Do you think about it differently? Is it kind of all one big strategy? Just, from an Itron perspective, how do you guys think about it?
Yeah, so you left the best for last, right, Jake?
Yeah.
Probably just trying to time box me from going off on a ramble here. So fair enough, fair enough. So yeah, I mean, so first and foremost, look, we have hundreds of millions of endpoints. Okay, our grand vision is, we want to envelop the world in our meters, right, kind of thing, because that's where we make our money. So great, right? So as we think about this, look, in the cloud, what do you govern in the cloud, right? I mean, edge fleet it's a life cycle problem, right? It's not a deployment problem, right? So in the cloud, you just govern your models. We were just talking about this a minute ago, but at the edge, right, you have to govern populations of models, right? It's you can't sit there and inspect hundreds of millions of edge devices. It's impractical. It's impossible, right? So what you really get after is, staged rollouts with firmware grade rigor, right? You start talking about automatic rollback on drift, right? And there should be no exceptions to how those things are handled, essentially, right? But as you start thinking about it, okay, from the others angle, right? There's another discipline that is absolutely necessary. We have to think about exceptions and telemetry, right? Yeah. Again, going back to the point that there are behavioral patterns that you need to really watch for, not continuously be monitoring hundreds of millions of endpoints over there, right? So that's where it comes in. If you start seeing anomalous behavior, you immediately step in and start looking at that versus just saying, okay, we're going to treat every single endpoint the same. So we're going to get billions and trillions of data every single day and not know what to do with it, right? So it goes back to that reality. And then I'll give you the third scenario, right, which comes in. Look, any physical edge device, right, can be physically captured. Okay, it can be stolen, right? So you don't want to put your crown jewels on there. Okay, what you want to do is you want to make sure that your deployments, right, don't contain anything that is super secret. Okay. So effectively, if someone gets it, just think about how Apple does their business, right? Look, you want to go in, you want to rob my Apple store, have at it. At the end of it, you just landed yourself a beautiful looking brick, right? So that's exactly the whole discipline around this. So as you think about edge AI and fleets over there, right? You called it, right? You have to govern for latency. You have to govern for bandwidth. But the more important piece is the discipline that goes into, okay, governing AI at the edge, because you want to have smarter devices. That's a market signal, it's a market mandate. You can't get around it, and that's what our business is based on, right? Smart meters, but we have to have the discipline about how we're going to govern these, and those are the three pieces that I see, right?
Perfect. Yeah, Mark, I think just from a security perspective, right, for edge devices too, maybe not in the pure, governance vein, but how do you guys look at, from an AI perspective, the differences between edge devices like that and workloads being run out on the fringes versus, how you would secure traditional networks and capability running, inside of normal networks?
Yeah, I think just building on what I think Anant hit a lot of good points. You effectively have hundreds of millions of endpoints, somewhat interacting with AI infra skills and so on. Some of the the advice on like making sure you're not storing sensitive credentials and other mechanisms and data on those devices is sort of some of the low-hanging fruit stuff, for sure. But kind of beyond that, a little bit, like every one of these assets, especially when you look at employee computing devices, like the next decade, I think you'll see a replacement as laptops and sort of company issued laptops and desktops to employees age out will be the rise of the AI PC. We'd already gotten ahead of this somewhat with Dell and Intel and others around NPUs and DPUs, like providing access to us to the horsepower necessary to start embedding models, AI models, like into our sensor, to do more sophisticated sort of processing and detection techniques, like at the AI-enabled asset. And so I think over the next decade, you'll see this sort of proliferation then, and like the market becomes an AI. Every employee is an AI kind of empowered employee with a local computing AI PC. And then just a week ago, Jensen, they showcased NVIDIA's sort of entrance into the market of like what the AI PC will look like for them. So I think there's a decade to run, and the rise of that and that power kind of being put in the hands of the employee. So we're only 6 months into OpenClaw and Hermes, and the next thing will be 2 months from now and 3 months from them, and the rising level of power and capability that every employee has, like that computing asset at the edge, or at home where I am right now, is like the new edge is everywhere. That becomes the entirety of the risk surface that you're then governing as part of enterprise architecture. So again, the controls that are necessary to kind of see what you need to see on the device, and whether that's from a network architecture perspective, and you're doing it with choke points, with sort of AI gateways, or some of the work that we've done. I mentioned, Intel, like there's NPU activated models now in our sensor that only become active with the prevalence of an AI powered PC, that then add the levels of controls for that device that's running anywhere in the world. All the way to kind of safeguarding the model infrastructure itself. We talked about prompt injection before, but like how do you safeguard the actual infra that the edge devices are communicating with, whether it's a private IP stack that you've built for your AI workloads, or you're partnering with a third party, and like what are they running in their cloud and how are they safeguarding it, so on. And governing the governor a little bit. And how do you know that the tool like ours is making the right decisions? And when you're empowering kind of autonomy into a cyber platform to kind of make the decisions of conviction for you, and then what gets triaged and what doesn't, what gets alerted, how do you govern that governor to make sure that it's doing it in a safe and secure and a responsible and an accurate way, as well? Like all of that kind of plays a role in it.
Yeah.
The one thing I just wanted to add to that, like this, when we're talking about the edge AI and those edge devices, this is also now becoming part of that selection process that you need to consider when you're looking to implement and deploy these edge devices, to ensure that you kind of have that control plane layer that allows for those model versions and that policy distribution, as well as ensuring that you're collecting the telemetry from those devices so that you can audit and ensure that you are getting the response, and the respecting of your policies is properly being enforced. So it's less, I see it less as being an issue of how do you manage these edge AI devices. It's more when you're selecting which edge AI devices to deploy, you have more rigorous due diligence needed to ensure that those proper control planes are enabled on those devices to allow for you to have those controls.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you frame it that way, and I think it's important too. The typical average devices in an IoT fleet has gone from like 10,000 to over 100,000 in the last year or two, right? So observability at scale, like you can't log everything from even 50,000 devices to a central store. You need sort of on-device anomaly detection that flags when sort of the inference patterns deviate, and you got to figure out a sampling strategy for that central review. But the thing that I've found is that governing a fleet of edge devices or edge models, or even network devices, right? It's closer to managing a supply chain than managing software. the unit of risk becomes the device rather than the code base, right? So I think people that are treating AI governance the same way you treat mobile device management are probably closer to right. And when you look at a fleet management plane, whether it's, AWS's Greengrass or Azure's Hub or NVIDIA Fleet Commander, whatever it is, that sort of enforces model versioning, health checks, and policy compliance centrally. Well, most of the execution and early detection of things stays local. Like the governance is the orchestration layer at that point. And so I think that's going to be the interesting balance that people have to figure out, like you said, Andrew, as they go forward and evaluate what this looks like for them and how technology modernization is gonna sort of take place.
Awesome. Well, I think that rounds out that last. We got a little bit of each of you on that last question, which is perfect. I know we're pushing at time here. One, I just want to thank Mark and not Andrew, Patrick for being on. I think this was a really valuable conversation. I think we could probably have separate discussions on each one of these sections and topics. But on that note, for the audience here, you've all been contacted by a POC here at Cyberhill as you've signed up. Please reach out with any questions you have, recommendations and things you'd like to dig into on a following session. I would love to have all of you back and we can expand the panel and kind of dig into some different topics. But we've already started to think about what that next event looks like. So if the audience here has any thoughts on what they'd want to see, any feedback on the format here and how we did things, all is welcome. No, panel, thank you again, everybody on the call. Thanks for joining. We really hope that you got some value out of this. And if questions do come in, we will make sure that we kind of triage, answer, and distribute both the questions and the answers kind of back out to the group here so that everybody gets that same kind of response and value. So appreciate everybody's time, and we'll see you on the next one. Appreciate it.
Thanks all. Cheers.
Folks.
Thank you. Thanks all.